to the PlayNation Podcast, episode 4. I am one of your hosts, Joe Quinn, and I am alongside the king of PlayStation himself, the magic, Micah Magruder. Micah, how are you today?
Hey there, Joe. I'm doing great. Episode 4 here. I mean, we're doing good. 400% episodes for the PlayNation Podcast, and we're just coming off the heels of the Game Awards, seeing some, culmination of the year's magnificent work. Even if you weren't a winner of the Game Awards, I mean, heck, you're honored to be honored, but I'm doing great, despite, some personal things happening at home with a few illnesses, a few test results waiting and all that. But, we're all doing good. The family's doing great. And, we're happy to be alive.
Your greatness renews my spirit. Your greatness is something which does me very well, right? So, and by the way, yeah, we really are. I mean, the one thing I was saying is that we are on the final stretch for the holidays, right? So everyone's talking about, and we'll talk about Cyberpunk a little bit, but the crunch is on, right? It's like game crunch, but it's like real life crunch. You know what I mean? Like my life right now is crunching.
I know.
So it's the final stretch to the holidays. Everything needs to get done prior to the holidays. My holiday shopping's almost done. Micah, I mean, we were talking about holiday shopping a little bit last week. I mean, are you done, or do you have a little bit left to go?
So, every year I do the same thing. Leah will buy the kids stuff, and I'll buy the kids stuff, a few things too. I'll buy my family stuff. But then when it comes down to having to get Leah, my wife, something, I always go out and go shopping myself because I need that day just to think about her and her alone. And I'm not going to have that this year. So now I have to get used to just being on the computer and actually looking through Target and this website and that website and hoping everything gets here in time. And I don't know. It's just not the same.
I mean, it's a strange year for holiday shopping, that's for sure. I mean, right now, I'm taking advantage as much as I can of sort of the technology of Amazon. This has been an Amazon shopping year. Normally for me, which I know a lot of people have been doing Amazon shopping for Christmas for years now, but for me, this is a new experience for me. Normally, look, I'm a go to the mall kind of guy. I go to the mall and I sort of do all my shopping in one day, right? And I just try to get it all done. It's a whole experience. I like walking around the mall, but this year obviously can't do that.
Yeah,
so I'm doing the electronic shopping. I would say 80% done. That's where I'm putting myself right now, 80% done. I am dealing with a little bit of a head cold, nothing super serious, but look, our beloved listeners out there, if you hear I'm a little bit congested, my apologies for such. I will try as best as I can to keep it above the board, right, and keep it sounding great, if you know what I mean, Micah.
Hey, you're doing great. You're such a trooper for even doing this.
Hey,
I mean,
wow.
You could have easily just said, I need a day off, but you know what? You said, no, we're doing this. You wrote this whole synopsis. We got a great episode here.
My bravery is an inspiration for us all. You know what I mean? So
it is.
I would say, Micah, we have a lot to talk about this week because we're reviewing. So just to give all our listeners our recap, here's what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to be recapping the Game Awards. If you recall, last week we gave our prediction, right? So, or our predictions for the show. This week, topic 1, we're going to be going over the results from the Game Awards. We're going to be talking about how right or how wrong we were. And in addition to the results, there were some key announcements that we need to go over. We need to go over with you. That's topic 1. Topic 2, we're going to tackle online toxicity. We're going to tackle online toxicity and maybe a little bit how it relates to The Last of Us Part 2. But the crux of the conversation in topic 2 is just going to be online toxicity and sort of a negative online culture that gamers sometimes have the reputation to promulgate. So we'll touch on that. Topic 3 is going to be sort of a Cyberpunk 2077 review roundup, right? So obviously there's a lot of controversy going on with Cyberpunk 2077, the release of the game, and sort of, I would say, the reception of the game, depending on maybe what kind of platform you decided to play on, right? So a couple different things there. But I would say let's jump into the first topic, the Game Awards, where last week we have some results. I'm just going to read off the results here, Micah. These are the categories that we were following, that we provided predictions for, right? So here are the results for that. I will start at the back and work my way forward. Best performance wound up being Laura Bailey playing Abby, winning best performance. I mean, let's just start there. I mean, I think we both picked Ashley Johnson, right? So this is, I mentioned during the show last week that this could be an upset for Laura Bailey. It turned out happening.
Yeah, no, it definitely was. And, being a person who has not actually completed The Last of Us 2, and for various reasons, not having to do with the story, but just personal gameplay preferences, but, appreciating what a beautiful story it is still. It definitely is a surprise, but not a surprise, simply because of the fact that this particular actress did a great job portraying a character that, let's be frank here, is very controversial. Mm-hmm. She's not exactly doing anyone any favors, bringing her in your corner and, rooting for her. So, sometimes you have to root for, sometimes the best performance isn't always the hero, or the anti-hero. It's, or the villain, you don't even call him a villain, really. It's just a character, right? So definitely a big spoiler, big upset for sure, but not surprising in my opinion.
Yeah, Laura Bailey wins best performance as Abby. I think that, look, my vote would have been for Ashley Johnson. I stand behind, kind of the vote I cast in the last show. But, Laura Bailey did a great job, and she is a very accomplished actor as it relates to voice acting in video games. She's done a lot. She's been a part of the Uncharted series, for instance. She's been a part of, many different games. So, great for Laura Bailey. Good for her. Moving on to the topic of best score, best soundtrack, Final Fantasy VII Remake. Michael, you guessed that one correct, right? I actually went the other way on this. I thought it was going to be Doom Eternal. I thought that was a slam dunk. Turns out, Final Fantasy VII.
They both had great soundtracks, right? Good scores. The thing I thought was going to be the determining factor was old school nostalgia winning, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what ended up winning here, is just that, people love this music. They grew up with it. Some people were in their teens when they first heard this music. So that's such a formative time in people's lives to actually have that. And then 20 some years later and change, you're hearing this music again, remastered to a certain extent. And by the way, during that segment, wasn't it just great hearing, and I don't know if it was this segment or maybe later, but hearing the London Philharmonic, whoever it was, they were just doing the scores for every game, and it was just wonderful to hear. Really cool. I'm glad I got that one right. But all of them definitely did a good job for sure.
Yeah. By the way, very salient points, right? So obviously turned out to be correct. I'd mentioned during the show last week that I thought, Final Fantasy, shout out and congrats to Square Enix for the big win. Again, Japanese company, these sort of Japanese titles with their great soundtracks. I pointed out Ni no Kuni, and even Persona 5. Persona 5 had a great audio performance, or they did almost like a concert from in studio that was really great. So shout out to Final Fantasy. Best art direction, right? So we actually both got this one right. We said Ghost of Tsushima, and it turns out Ghost of Tsushima becoming the winner here, right? So good for all the folks over at Sucker Punch. Ghost of Tsushima, best art direction. Yeah,
a little breadcrumb to them, but a well-deserving one. Last of Us 2 can't sweep every category. Ghost of Tsushima definitely deserving of this one. I think we both agreed on that one.
Best audio design went to The Last of Us Part 2. I picked The Last of Us Part 2. Mike, I forget. Did you pick The Last of Us Part 2 for best audio design?
We'd have to go back and look. I can't remember.
Best audio design, again, the one thing I was pointing out was the conversations you would hear between the NPCs and the relationships that they had with each other, and even their pets and dogs and things like this. I thought that was really, really exceptional.
Yeah.
By the way, we're about to rattle off a list of categories here. Of the remaining categories that are left, all won by The Last of Us Part 2, right? So best audio design, they also won best narrative, right? I don't think that was any shock either. Best narrative, The Last of Us Part 2. Micah, any shock there?
Not particularly. They just had revenge is just a great narrative. It just honestly is. And then revenge of revenge, the whole thing is just really good.
Double Agent Revenge. It was revenge on top of revenge. Best direction, The Last of Us Part 2. Obviously, what they did with sort of the twist, right, that goes on about halfway through the game where you obviously play as a different character. So best direction to The Last of Us Part 2. And obviously, Game of the Year. Right, so the game of 2020, the Game of the Year winner, The Last of Us Part 2. By the way, just if anyone keeping track, The Last of Us Part 2 won 7 awards during the Game Awards. This is, in fact, a record. in Game Awards history. Game Awards been around since 2014, so it's not like we're talking about 30 years worth of history. But since 2014, no one's won 7 of them. Last of Us Part 2 setting that number. Micah, just any final thoughts on The Last of Us Part 2 taking these 7 trophies home?
Not particularly. I mean, I think everyone kind of knew it, whether they agreed with The Last of Us 2 being Game of the Year in their hearts, or they believe that the Game Awards are just a chance for publishers and developers to pay money to journalists to win their votes. I mean, I think everyone kind of knew The Last of Us Part 2 was definitely going to win. In my opinion, you look at all these games, they all could be Game of the Year in their own right. I mean, there's a reason they were all nominated, but ultimately one game always wins out. And when you have a game that has such vision and beauty and great narrative and everything, all these things combined, I mean, there's a reason it wins all these different categories, because that's what makes it Game of the Year. It's no surprise.
Yeah, I don't really understand sort of well, look at it. I'll phrase it differently. I understand completely why The Last of Us Part 2 won, right? Because I think that, and we'll go over this a little bit in topic 3 with Cyberpunk, but one of the things that's become painfully obvious in 2020, and by the way, this is no disrespect to any of the other candidates that were nominated, right? Ghost of Tsushima, I mean, these are tremendous games, right? But one of the things that really highlights, especially with the release of Cyberpunk, is how painfully difficult it is to release a game of polish, of that quality, right? When you go through, you play The Last of Us Part 2, this is a tremendously well done AAA game that was released. I mean, it was essentially, I don't want to say perfect upon release, but it was no issues, right? It looked great, it sounded great, and they really took some daring steps with the story. It's a beloved franchise, a beloved IP. To me, The Last of Us Part 2 very clearly, I think, again, you can argue subjective versus objective. You can say subjectively, I don't like the direction that they took in terms of, the creative decisions or the story decisions. So you can subjectively sort of say, yep, I didn't agree with that. But I think objectively, you have to look at it and sort of say, wow, this is a bright and just absolutely almost a flawless diamond of a game in The Last of Us Part 2. So congrats to Naughty Dog. Congrats to Neil Druckmann. Great job with The Last of Us Part 2. But there were other things besides awards going on during the Game Awards. Actually, tons of announcements that came through. I made a nice little list, Micah, for us to go down in terms of announcements that came out at the Game Awards. I think we should go over just a few of them and sort of see where we're at.
Yeah.
First one, and I think this to me was the coolest. This is the one that I saw, the first announcement I saw that was like a very wow moment. I don't know how much everyone else is going to be excited about this. I'm anxious to gauge your reaction on this. Returnal. So Returnal from Housemarque Games. Housemarque, known for Alienation, known for Resogun, which was actually a PS4 launch game. So Housemarque now releasing Returnal. It now has a release date, March 19, 2021. This is going to be a third person, I would even say a roguelike, right? Because it's going to be different worlds every time you spin up, so to speak. But that got a release date and a new trailer that some people thought was actually a Silent Hill trailer at the beginning because of the door entrance.
Ambiance and everything, yeah.
Yep. So Returnal, March 19, 2021. Micah, any excitement level for this game? Keeping hype and expectations tempered as always. That is a rule in my life. I'm looking forward to seeing how they actually handle things such as their roguelike elements. So each world is different, and also seeing how they handle DualSense, making sure it's not gimmicky and makes sense within the world, and hoping Santa Claus does bring me the Pulse 3D audio set, simply because of the fact that they do say that 3D audio will be a big part of the game to provide a more immersive experience. So I'm not particularly excited, but also not going to shut this one out until I see reviews, see how people like it, and then I'll pick it up possibly. I like the developer. I always believe and trust the developer. I trust Housemarque to deliver a truly excellent game, just because everything that they've done, again, to use another example, Next Machina, everything that they've done is a really tremendous game. So Returnal, I expect, is going to be no different in terms of quality. And it's interesting you mentioned the DualSense, because they already talked about a couple of interesting things that they're going to do with the DualSense, one of which I read. I don't know how many people read this, but when you press the left trigger halfway for the first half, when you're pressing down the left R2, or I should say L2, it'll be sort of aiming your weapon. But if you push past that, it'll almost snap down, and it'll engage sort of a secondary power weapon that would then come out, right? So,
that's interesting. Yeah, no, that'd be an interesting mechanic if it works out pretty well. Or is it going to be one of those things that you move past all the time? It's like, oh crap, I got my secondary weapon out, kind of thing. That should be interesting. I think we both know with the DualSense triggers, you definitely know when there's resistance, so you know when to chillax on it. So I could see that being done pretty well.
Yeah, using the resistance on L2 and R2, so that this way, once you pass that halfway mark, it kind of releases the floodgates and opens up a new weapon. I think that's really interesting. So Returnal, March 19, 2021, looking forward to it. The next one that I listed here, which I think is going to be one of the two, actually the next two are going to be the ones that I think may not be super interesting to me, but I think that a lot of people are really going to resonate with these. The first of which is that the Mass Effect franchise is promising now to move forward. Micah, are you a big Mass Effect fan?
So I wouldn't call myself a big Mass Effect fan. I did play through the trilogy. I skipped out on Mass Effect Andromeda because of reviews, and just didn't seem interesting. I mean, the trilogy, the characters I enjoyed are gone. Andromeda was in a brand new galaxy, so brand new game. But the fact that it is, the moment I saw that N7 logo picked up, I was like, I know this. Yep. So it was a very, I won't call it fanboyish, but at least recognizable, possibly a return to the roots, because I know it includes one of the characters. Probably going to butcher it, Liara. I mean, I'm again not a big Mass Effect fan.
Right.
I did appreciate the series a couple years ago when I did play it, so I could see that being a big game for all consoles and PC going forward.
Yeah, I played Mass Effect on PS3 when by the way, it was a delayed release to PS3. It took a while to get there, but when Mass Effect finally came to PS3, I gave it a play there, and I'm going to be honest, I didn't even finish the game just because, and this is going to sound like a weird thing to say, but when you talk about gamer choice and being able to create your own narrative and stuff like that, to me, that doesn't do a whole lot. I actually really like it when a developer has a story in mind and they've determined what it is they're going to tell me. I don't necessarily need sort of a choose my own adventure book. I actually prefer that the book has a definitive beginning, middle, and end. So Mass Effect, not really sort of my bag, but actually on the one that I didn't play, but I could see myself really enjoying these games, Dragon Age. So Dragon Age Inquisition was a big hit. Dragon Age new game teased, right? We're gonna have a new Dragon Age game, big open world dragon slaying kind of fun ordeal. Micah, any excitement for a new Dragon Age?
So I did play Dragon Age Origins, Dragon Age 2, Dragon Age Inquisition, but never beat those games either. So that's been one of my video gaming sins, that I play games and I never finish them because I never pick them back up after you always get to a wall and you just come back. I mean, these games are just, Dragon Age Origins wasn't as big an open world as Dragon Age Inquisition, but Inquisition was my first PS4 game I had. So that one was a very good one to have, very good to get used to the PS4 and everything, and enjoy a game that won a lot of accolades. I could probably see myself getting into Dragon Age, possibly buying into the hype. I do like that setting, that world of fantasy, high fantasy / hack and slash, and I could see myself enjoying it for sure.
I think release timing, this is just me personally, I think release timing is going to be a big thing in terms of whether or not I'm going to play the new Dragon Age game, just because, is it a day one purchase for me? Mm-hmm. Probably not, just because as you've played all of these different games, I have not, right? So in other words, I am not necessarily super invested in the Dragon Age IP and all this stuff. It's just not a franchise I've gotten into, but I am interested. I do want to jump in. So depending on when the game is released, and what's kind of in that window, I'll put it this way. I'll give it a look, right? So Dragon Age, I'll give it a look. The next one, very much. Speaking of ones that I will be on day one, this is a day one purchase for me for sure. Right. So Dead Space is one of my favorite horror franchise of all time, especially in terms of video games. I love horror movies. I love horror TV shows. I love horror games. Dead Space is one of the best ever to do that in my mind. So the creator of Dead Space announced the Callisto Protocol, right? It's going to be a 2022 PS5 game. So we're going to have to wait to get this one, right? So it's going to be quite some time from now. But the trailer looked really, really good. It looked absolutely horrifying, which is great news for me, right? So, but the Callisto Protocol, any excitement for this, Micah?
Not particularly, because I'm kind of the opposite of you. Survival horror, and maybe that's one of the reasons I'm not that big of a fan of The Last of Us. You know, the idea of, you know, surviving and things like that. I'm not a big fan of it. You know, I'm more of an action type game. I like to go in guns a-blazing if I can, rather than scrounging and, you know, trying not to die. But I'm reading about this Callisto Protocol, and here's an interesting tidbit: is that apparently the game is set in the same narrative universe as PlayerUnknown's Battleground, but
Really?
several centuries in the future. Yeah, I found that very interesting while I'm reading it just now.
Cool.
That it's apparently in the same IP realm universe. I wonder how they'll kind of tie those two franchises together as one big franchise. I'm not sure, but find that very interesting.
Yeah, I mean that's supremely interesting. And by the way, just the genre speaks to me, and as well, I do think that just looking at it's difficult to tell with a cinematic trailer like that what the gameplay is going to be. It's difficult to tell with a cinematic trailer like that what the quality of the game is going to be. So a lot of these things, it's easy to get hyped on. You see that sort of movie-like trailer, and you're like, wow, this is going to be great. But I do want to see more. We're still a ways out, 2022, but it's on my radar for sure. The next game that we're going to talk about, Open Roads, right? So Open Roads comes from Fullbread Studios. Fullbread Studios known for the smash hit Gone Home, and as well their follow-up Tacoma, which was a timed Microsoft exclusive. It eventually came to PlayStation. I played it when it eventually came over. But Open Roads, new from Fullbread Studios. I'm assuming that this is going to be some sort of a thinker type game, one of the quote unquote walking simulators, but it looks like it's a little bit more interactive, I would say, than the previous two titles, just because it almost looks like a hitchhiker simulator. That's what it looks like to me. It looks like essentially like Hitchhiker, sort of the game. But Micah, any interest in Open Roads?
Not for me, but I do like the fact that, you know, it stars Kerry Russell, Caitlin Dever. So I think the idea of a narrative-based film about a narrative-based game could definitely draw in a lot of folks who normally don't play video games, right? So this could definitely be, you know, something on some people's radars where they just want something simple and relaxed to go back on, and not have to fight and kill things. Very simple. You know, apparently through the narrative, you expose character flaws, secrets, and buried truths. So I wonder if it kind of has similar effects to LA Noire, where you had to tell whether people were lying or not. That was a big gameplay element. It'd be interesting to see how this game actually comes through with development when it's released, and you know, how well it's received as well.
It's really interesting that we're getting more and more sort of Hollywood stars coming into games like this. Kerry Russell coming into the game, pretty cool. And as well, it's going to be very story driven, right? It's going to be it looks very much like a mother-daughter scenario, right? Traveling, right, via car from place to place. And so, you know, it does look interesting. I am interested to sort of see. I don't know that it even explicitly stated if it was coming to PlayStation. I'm not 100% sure on that, but Open Roads, really interesting. The next one up is Seasons, which is the sophomore effort from a studio called Scavengers. Now, I'm not this is one that generated a lot of hype online, but I'll be very candid. I wasn't super keen on either Scavenger Studio or anything like this. Seasons, it looks gorgeous. The trailer looks, I mean, we talk about art style and all that. It looks awesome. So Seasons has my attention. I'll be looking forward to that. Mike, any excitement from Seasons?
The trailer definitely drew me in a bit, you know, talking about, you know, our grandfathers had, you know, a millennia to live, and our parents had like a century, and we only have a season. And I'm probably butchering it, of course, but, you know, looking at it, it kind of reminded me of Pokemon Snap and Go a little bit with, you know, taking a picture of of a butterfly while during the trailer. So it's definitely very interesting where this game's going to go. It seems like it's going to have a narrative that's very specific to something. I kind of wonder if it's going to be, is it going to be ham-fisting, the idea of climate change, perhaps? What's going on in this world where you only live a season? I don't know. So I'm hoping it's nothing that's going to try to shove a narrative about a particular topic, but maybe something, maybe it's just very, very innocuous too at the same time. I think we can all agree on certain things happening around the real world right now. So it should definitely, I'm just hoping the execution is very well done. That's all, because it is a PlayStation exclusive. I think this is the first one we've mentioned that is a PlayStation exclusive so far. So
it looks cool. I don't know too much about it. It looks very good. I'm excited for it. I want to see more, but it's difficult to tell in a game like that if it's going to be good. I don't know if that's necessarily a wait for reviews kind of game to sort of see what other people are kind of talking about, but it's another one that's on my radar, and I'll wait and see how it comes. Back 4 Blood was another game that was shown, just to move on to Back 4 Blood, which is essentially a new Left 4 Dead game. It's not Left 4 Dead. I don't know if it's technically in the same universe, but from Turtle Rock Studios, it looks like a Left 4 Dead clone, right? But it's Back 4 Blood. It looks extremely fast, kinetic, shooter, just taking down hordes of zombies. Any interest in Back 4 Blood?
I played Left 4 Dead and Left 4 Dead 2 a couple years ago, when I had friends that wanted to play it, but never played it on my own much because it's, again, I think The Walking Dead ruined me on zombie survival horror. I just got so overdone with it. But no, the moment I saw a horde of zombies and then one person fighting them off and then 3 other characters joining them, I was like, oh, this is Left 4 Dead. It's got to be. What else could this game be? But Back 4 Blood is apparently what it is. But, it's looking good for Turtle Rock Studios, to be the successor to this game. I think this will get a lot of people interested in the game. It'll be on a lot of different platforms, it looks like. So definitely good for that genre, particularly if people want this kind of game in their wheelhouse.
I think that zombie fatigue is very real. At least it was, right? I don't necessarily know that it is anymore. And I think that it very well might be time for another one of these games. I think that, I think that's great. Is it my type of game? Not necessarily, but I think it looks good. And I think it looks interesting. And, there's going to be a lot of people because Left 4 Dead, huge franchise. People love it. So that's going to be a big game. Disco Elysium. Next game up, coming to PS5, March 2021. Disco Elysium. This is, you talk about an indie darling type game. You talk about a game that was reviewed extremely well. PC game and now finally coming to consoles. Disco Elysium. Any interest in playing this?
Honestly, never heard of Disco Elysium before, and that's a sin on my part. But having watched it and actually listening to it, I can see myself playing it if it's particularly on sale, simply because of the fact that it's not my game I would want to actually play immediately on day one. But after hearing enough buzz about it, I'd probably be interested in it at some point.
Yeah, this is a game where the buzz has the buzz is louder than the game itself, right? So I keep hearing how great of a game this is. I keep hearing Disco Elysium. This is a must-play game. This is so awesome. This is an amazing game. But I've actually heard very little about the game itself, right? I'm not exactly sure what the game is about or what the mechanics are or what's going on there. But everyone's saying it's a must-play game. So I will, in fact, be looking closely at this. Next up is Oddworld. And this is, I'm very, very excited for this one. Oddworld Soulstorm. So if you look at the trailers for these Oddworld games, they look amazing, right? And this is coming from someone who has not played previous Oddworld games, but it looks so good to me, at least. Oddworld Soulstorm coming in spring 2021. Micah, your excitement, Oddworld.
Oddworld, if you had the original PS1 a long time ago, you've been with this franchise for a long time, and I think of that meme, name me a character who's gone through more pain and suffering than her, referring to Ellie from Last of Us, and I'm thinking of Abe probably. I killed him so many different times playing the game in various different ways. wasn't a huge fan of the game beyond the first time being introduced to it a long time ago. But he's almost like a mascot for PlayStation, I feel like. And I don't know if he's always only been on PlayStation, but I think this could be a very good way to introduce players back to Abe and the Oddworld universe, simply because of the fact that I feel like he's been missing. It just doesn't feel like he's been around this past generation, and maybe he has, and I just have not noticed. And that's a problem either on my part or on the part of the developers for Oddworld Inhabitants. So, should be interesting to see how this game is developed and how it comes out.
Yeah, I'd like to think I consider myself pretty boned up on classic PlayStation IP, but Oddworld is just one of those ones that have slipped through the cracks. Not super into it up until this point, but I'll tell you this: looking at it now, I very much want to go back. I very much and will go back and play the other Oddworld games, so that this way I'm ready for Soulstorm. But based on what I'm seeing for Soulstorm, it visually looks amazing. The story looks super, super interesting. So I'm on board with it. I'll put it that way. Next up is It Takes Two, coming from Hazelight. Right, so Hazelight, known for cooperative multiplayer games, did No Way Out, I believe it was called, the 2-player sort of prison break game from Hazelight, Joseph Fares. So this is great. It Takes Two. This is a game that I looked at, one of the most excited games that I walked away from on the Game Awards. Again, this is a day one purchase for me. This is a game that me and Erica will for sure play through. And we were both watching the trailer, looking at it, sort of saying like, yeah, no, 100%, we're going to play this game.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is exactly kind of what I've been wanting from game developers, is to go back to couch co-op gaming. Yep. I'm not even sure if they have online co-op, but that doesn't even matter, because I mean, this game seems like I don't even know if you could even play by yourself, right? So it definitely seems like a good co-op game. Definitely good on them for being able to secure the music rights to the song It Takes Two. So very being able to have that as their title, just definitive. It does take two. I mean, I'm looking at a screenshot right here where they're both playing with a controller right now. So it should be very interesting seeing how this game comes out and what kind of powers each character has. Will you want to play the I don't even know the characters' names. Who do you want to play? Will be interesting to see here. Maybe you have to take turns.
It'd be interesting. Maybe Eric and I will flip, right? So maybe I'll play the bride and she'll play the groom. But ultimately, I think that's the fun part, because I'm assuming they're both going to have different mechanics and they're going to have different sort of play styles, right? There's going to be some sort of twist there. The last game I want to mention is Crimson Desert, which was, I'll save this one for last because I do think it is the most interesting. It's the debut sort of offering from a South Korean developer by the name of Pearl Abyss. This looked like a AAA style game. The trailer almost opened, I want to say, with like 3 straight minutes. It wasn't quite 3 straight minutes, but it was a long time of just vistas, of just scenic backdrops, and they all looked gorgeous. This looked like a really, really good game. By the way, this highlights sort of the Asian sort of development community that is now starting to pop up, whether it's in Korea, China, etc. This looked good to me. This looked really good. Micah, what were your thoughts on Crimson Desert?
So Crimson Desert, my understanding is it's by the same developers who made Black Desert Online, which is a MMORPG, apparently. And, I'm double checking my work here as I'm talking here, but it's set in that same universe. So some folks who got a little bit turned off by the microtransactions of Black Desert Online are immediately poo-pooing this. But if it stays single player, right, or if it stays co-op, or even just, local or online multiplayer, if you choose to, kind of thing, if it stays within that boundaries of staying an action adventure open world game. And another thing too, a lot of folks were talking like there's absolutely no dialogue. You saw characters talking and no dialogue. My guess is probably it's not been, voice acted for, an American audience yet, possibly. So it's always possible that they have an idea of what they want to do. But I mean, you can tell these characters are having intense dialogues throughout the game. So it does seem like there is story here. And you mentioning the beauty of the landscape and the vistas. I mean, my God, it looks gorgeous. For a second I was like, is this the Microsoft Flight Simulator preview for a second? But it certainly wasn't, because you saw a lot of open world character running around in cities and things like that. But it definitely seems like a good game to get lost in from the open world perspective. So definitely keeping this on my radar, waiting to hear more about it. May not be a day one purchase, but maybe day two.
I thought this was, my apologies, I thought this was the debut offering for Pearl Abyss. If they in fact this is sort of a we'll call it a sophomore effort, then that's what it is. But I'll say this, it does not look like a debut offering. It looks like it's coming from sort of a seasoned developer. It looks like it's coming from someone who really knows what they're doing. It looks like one of these open world sort of just these massive open world sort of type games that you could just lose like 200 hours in. That's what it looks like to me. And it looks a little bit different enough where I would want to get involved in it. So I want to see more. So Crimson Desert, we'll wait and see what happens. This is actually a good opportunity because that concludes sort of our list of items that we wanted to touch on that were announced. Right, so let's bring in our question for this particular topic, right? You can write in a question as well, right? We'll read it live on air, so please feel free to write in a question to show@playnationpodcast.com, where we can read your question, we'll answer it for you. But the question for this particular topic is, did the Game Awards meet your expectations? Right, so we went in there, we had our predictions, we kind of had our thoughts as to what was going to happen, but as you now are, sort of a couple days removed from it, did it hit the notes that you wanted it to hit?
It did. I mean, I knew from the perspective of a celebration of gaming, that's exactly what it would be. And it was very wholesome. There were some good moments. Sean Murray and No Man's Sky won a great award for best ongoing game. I mean, the poor guy was drinking a beer and like nearly spit it out, like having won. He didn't realize they were going to win. And that game is just like a Cinderella story of like a developer kind of over promising and then having a very bad launch, bad user reviews, and then going back to the drawing board and saying, all right, we're going to try again. We're going to deliver what we promised. And then they did it and then some. Like No Man's Sky has become a completely different game the past 5 years, and people love them for it because, they actually delivered rather than just saying, well, we got your money. So I think it did meet my expectations. I think the Among Us developers, I mean, they had a very touching moment, like, realizing how much people love their game and what a great game that is for people to be able to enjoy remotely distanced from each other. My kids are playing it all the time. So, you get to see the other side, if you're a PC gamer, you get to see what the console and the mobile gamers are doing. If you're only into mobile gaming, you get to see what the big developers are doing, and I think it did meet my expectations from the perspective of what I wanted to see. No, but that's okay. I'm not going to be upset, be like, oh, why didn't they show Ragnarok or anything like that? I'm not going to be like that simply because of the fact that I want them to show Ragnarok when they got something to show for Ragnarok.
Yeah, to me, this sounds crazy, but one of my favorite parts of the entire evening was the music. Right, so was the music of it. I really enjoyed the sort of the Persona music, and then they had the London Symphony Orchestra, and they played the Mario sort of for the 35th anniversary. I think that was really cool. And obviously Eddie Vedder performing.
Oh God, that was so good. That was so good. Yep.
So the music for me was a big hit. And as well, by the way, I agree with what you're saying, right? Sean Murray and No Man's Sky and Hello Games, probably one of the best comeback stories in the history of modern gaming, right? So that is a tremendous comeback story. The only thing that can overtop that comeback story would be like if the Atari brand really came back and just they released a new console, but which I think they're doing. But yeah, so that's a great comeback story, right? So good to see Sean Murray, good to see No Man's Sky and all that. The thing that, besides the music, the thing that really was the most standout for me was actually what wasn't there, right? We were talking about all the things that we were kind of expecting, and no Horizon, right? No new trailer for Horizon. And you mentioned, right, Ragnarok, right? No new trailer for Ragnarok. So, to me, I was wondering where those kind of were. And what this highlights to me is that so the first half of 2021, I mean, what is really coming out for PS5 during this time? I was expecting the Game Awards to be this big coming out party for 2021 in PlayStation. what do we really have on the horizon for 2021 for PlayStation fans? I mean, we have Returnal, right? Looking at that, and maybe Oddworld, Soulstorm. I don't know. Is there enough that you see on the plate going in next year for PlayStation? Is there enough to keep us fed? Is there enough food on the table for us going into next year?
I mean, we'd have to look at the, I don't know what the best website would be for this about the games, when they're coming out, and look at that kind of chart. But from the perspective of what's been announced, I mean, we got a few good announcements here, I think. So, I think it's going to be, I don't know. Nothing blew me away to be like, oh, it's launching right now. It's like, I mean, I didn't think that was going to happen anyway.
Yeah, I just look at it this way. I look at I'm asking myself, what am I going to be playing next? What am I going to be playing into next year? And the answer is Returnal and Oddworld. And aside from Returnal and Oddworld, I'm looking at 2021 and I'm seeing a lot of empty space, right? And I'm sure that'll eventually fill out. I'm sure that as time is a great thickener of things. As we continue to go forward, I'm sure games will sort of announce and come in. But that's my only concern. I just look at this and I sort of think, I'd like to see more announcements coming in that are going to fill that calendar with sort of more games or anything else that would be an anticipated title, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we can do is we could possibly do that as part of our next episode to talk about that kind of thing. Because I'm looking at a list right here and I'm like, ooh, 2021 looks like it might deliver with a lot of good games if they come out either for PS4 and PS5 or just PS5 only. So I think we should definitely take stock of what is known. That yes, we're definitely going to be out there in 2021, and talk about our New Year's resolution of what would look good in 2021 for sure.
I think you're right. I think most anticipated games would be a great topic, right? So that'll be a great topic for another day. Speaking of topics, let's move on to our second topic, right? So topic 2. Online toxicity, right? So one of the things that we wanted to talk about in the second topic was online toxicity, and specifically as a launching point, we can kind of use The Last of Us Part 2 as an example here, but I will see where the conversation necessarily heads, right? So online toxicity has been an issue in games, I would say, for the last maybe 5 years or so, maybe even longer. Micah, you and I were talking about how this goes back even further. But everything from, and again, using The Last of Us Part 2 as a touch point, right, where you have Neil Druckmann and the entire voice cast getting death threats for over a year. There was a huge leak that was, by the community that sort of leaked out all of the video cutscenes for the entire game, things like this. So just to sort of talk about this in an open sense, to sort of get an idea for it, coming off the Game Awards, right? So online toxicity, is this something that moving forward, I think that we should be overly concerned with?
Yes and no. I think there's a difference between negativity and toxicity. It's okay if you didn't like The Last of Us 2 and the direction that the story took and what happened. It's okay to be disappointed. As a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that was kind of the entire point of the story, is that disappointment and anger and upset. Like, I mean, the characters probably felt, they acted exactly the way you did at the way the story went. But when it becomes a problem is simply when you start to take that negativity and you keep it up all the time. You start doing review bombing, even go as far as cast death threats towards people, and it just becomes toxic at that point. It's completely toxic, and that's not what's needed in this world at all. I mean, these are video games with fictional characters that are created by real people who probably have the same thoughts that you do. I mean, I'm sure there's people at Naughty Dog who felt like, I don't really want to take the story in this direction, but this is the way it was decided, and so we're going to deliver the best product based on what it was decided. So it's like you have to go down the Buddhist philosophy of letting go of your attachments. Really, you're attached to this idea that this is the way it should be, but that is not the way the reality is. So you have to let go of your attachment towards this idea of the way things should be. And let go of your own suffering and stop causing other people to have suffering too.
Yeah, I think The Last of Us is a great example just because, and by the way, the Game Awards actually had a pretty small example in the grand scheme of things, but it was a good example, right? So they had the Player's Voice Award, which, by the way, Ghost of Tsushima won the Player's Voice Award. Congrats to Sucker Punch, congrats to the game. But the reason why I bring this up is because as the Player's Voice Award and the voting and all that was going on for the Player's Voice Award, at one point in time, the website was hacked, and it took away all the votes for everyone. Right, but specifically, it was in response to the fact that The Last of Us Part 2 was winning. Right, so in other words, The Last of Us Part 2 was winning, so someone went in and hacked the website, took out all the votes, and gave them all. I think it was like the Hades or Ghost of Tsushima or something like that, right? And just took it all down. And as I'm following sort of after this, by the way, then the votes started to shift, and all of a sudden Ghost of Tsushima started gaining steam. But as I'm following all the comments that are going on there, it is just absolutely mind-blowingly aggressive. With everyone towards each other saying that either The Last of Us Part 2 is trash or that The Last of Us Part 2 is sort of like video game Jesus, so to speak, right? It's the greatest video game of all time, right? And it just seems to be this sort of a chasm of a divide between people who don't like the game and people who do like the game. And I think what's missing, and I think this is where the toxicity comes in, is that there's a missing conversation between subjective and objective. And I talked about it before when we were talking about the awards and who wins and who doesn't win, right? So and review bombing is a perfect example of this, where you're review bombing The Last of Us Part 2 and you're saying the game's a 0 out of 10. The game's a 0. And people going in before, the day the game launched, right? I think it was something like within hours of the game launching, and I think Metacritic changed the rules on this. It had something like 20,000 0 votes for, the user reviews. So people who are not even really playing the game saying, well, 0 out of 10. And I think this is where you get into the toxic element, because it's the Last of Us Part 2 is clearly not a 0, right? When you look at the graphics, the sound, even if you dislike sort of the decisions, right? The subjective decisions that were made for the story, for Ellie, for Joel, for all the characters that you love, even if you disagree with the subjective choices there, objectively, the game is of incredible polish and quality.
Yeah.
Right? So you have this, and again, it's the inability, I think, for a lot of people to decipher between those two pieces.
Yeah, no, it absolutely is. And I think it just comes down to, again, that whole attachment towards a certain character. And, they did him dirty. And it's like, you know what? Yeah, they did. I mean, what happened in The Last of Us 2 is absolutely horrifying. It is. I'm halfway through the game because I wanted to be able to talk about this more intelligently. And, I know exactly why people are upset. And it is heartbreaking and it is horrifying to watch helplessly that, like, I can't believe they're doing this. And I get it. And I think that's the point, is that we are attached to characters, and when they are suddenly ripped from us in such a way, we want to lash out. But what people lash out at is, there's a reason they hate this character so much, is because she's the epitome of what happened. But then they hate Naughty Dog, they hate Neil Druckmann, they hate every creative person who had any hand in this process. And so when you start hating every aspect of the game, like, it's a 0 out of 10. Well, what about graphically? 0 out of 10. What about gameplay wise? 0 out of 10. It's like, no, it's not. Just be honest with yourself. You did not like the way the story went, and that's fine. I don't think Ellie liked the way the story went. I don't think a lot of the people who worked on the game liked the way the story went. I'm sure everybody would like for it to have been a fairy tale ending, or maybe handled a little bit differently. That's also the kind of reaction that they were trying to go for, is that in this kind of world, people are ripped from you violently and awfully. And that experience you're feeling is the exact intended feeling that they wanted to invoke as part of this game.
And isn't that really a counterproductive way of going about things, right? In terms of review bombing, right? Just to sort of speak to that, right? So if you're talking about going in and putting all the user reviews as 0, right, and you're going to write, all these nasty things about, Neil and the team and all this stuff, isn't that really a counterproductive way to express your view, in the sense that delegitimizes the user score? So in other words, if you are a person who's thinking about buying the game, you're sort of on the fence, like, well, I kind of enjoyed the first one, maybe I'll enjoy the second one, who knows, right? So if you're one of these on the fence people, it doesn't completely ruining the user score. Doesn't that kind of hurt the cause of getting your views out there that you disliked sort of the direction of the game by just sort of taking the entire score and dumping it in the garbage, so to speak?
I think it's just this instant. Oh, sorry, drop something. I think it's just this instant gratification thing of I'm going to review bomb them and give them a 0 out of 10 on Metacritic, IMDb, and everything else. And it's just short-sighted. I mean, the game still sold tremendously well. It was a game of the year. And I think the amount of negative reviews, like I'm not a reviewer myself. I don't normally go out and review games, whether I loved them or hated them, but you tend to hear the hatred more simply because they're more, they find their place, like there's a subreddit for The Last of Us right now where they all, the hive mind is specifically to hate this game. And that is just the way things are.
It's frustrating because this is where you get into, well, the internet is not reality, right? Because when you look at the millions and millions of votes that The Last of Us Part 2 received for the Player's Choice Award, when you look at all of, the multitude of awards it experienced, that obviously sold extremely well, right? It was one of the best-selling, Sony games, that they've ever put out. So the game did pretty well across the board. The only thing that is again, this hanging over it sort of thing is that this couple thousand, or maybe we'll call it 20,000, right? A very, very vocal minority of people who did not like it, right? So in other words, who really felt like that it was the opposite, that it was this crime against video games, so to speak.
Yeah, I think that's the thing is that, in the age of the internet, like if this had happened before the internet, right? Before people could freely talk amongst themselves and find, similarly like-minded people, you may have had one or two friends who were like, and I had one, a friend of mine who I, just snagged him a PS5. And he came over yesterday to grab it. And we were talking about The Last of Us Part 2, and he thought, the story was a little bit lazy, he felt, and that's perfectly fine if you feel that way. But this friend isn't going and finding all the same people who feel the exact same, or even worse, if you like the game, telling you how wrong you are for liking the game. You're stupid for liking the game. You're an absolute idiot for liking the game. And that's the kind of thing that it's just like, dude, back off. Come on. I mean, it's okay to like the game and it's okay to not like the game.
What would be a great way for players to voice their opinion, quote, and I'm putting it in air quotes here, but what would be an appropriate way for players to voice their opinion, quote unquote, responsibly, right? That's the thing that gets me, which is that like, for instance, if someone had put in, right, that The Last of Us Part 2 was, say a 5 out of 10, really appreciated the gameplay aspect of it. So that part of the game was pretty good. But the other sort of half of the game, the story aspect of it, I couldn't get behind, I couldn't respect, right? What would be an appropriate avenue, I think, for players to voice their displeasure with, say, a game that they were really excited for that they then were not happy with?
I mean, it kind of comes down to exactly what you said. Like if you felt this was a 5 out of 10 based on the story, brought it down from a 10 of 10 all the way to a 5 of 10, and you liked everything else about the game, but this one particular gameplay element that you didn't like or appreciate, then go put your review out there and then go back to other games. I mean, don't keep focusing on this. And that's the major problem, is that it's been how many months since this game came out? And people are still upset. People are still talking about it. And, the Game Awards, coming up is probably another good reason, it came up again. But I feel like, you just got to put your voice out there and then detach yourself from it and then don't come back to it. Like when you keep coming back to this, and I mean, it could be trauma, it could be people are literally traumatized by what happened to one of their favorite characters in their favorite video game franchise. That's really it. It's just like they need to find a way to be able to handle what had happened in a constructive way. And probably the best way of doing that is writing about it and then moving on.
One of the other things that I sort of am concerned about with this is that we're living in a golden age of video games, so to speak. Right? So in other words, especially PS5, this generation will play out as it will, but especially during the PS4 generation, right? I mean, talking about a golden age of video games where the quality is higher than it's ever been before, right? You're talking about the quality of games that are quite literally PS4, The Last of Us Part 2, just looking at you talk about the polish and the quality on that game. in 1985, that would be completely unheard of, right? That would be just otherworldly. But here's the thing. It costs the exact same as a game from 1985, right? So in other words, the cost of games has remained the same since 1980 in terms of $20, right? A game would cost back then, it would be like $120, $150 in terms of adjusted for inflation, right? So games, obviously in PS5, now we have a $10 increase, but prior to the $10 increase, I mean, games were the exact same that they used to cost in 1991, which is absolutely insane to think about. But the quality has gone way, way, way up higher, right? Used to have games that were made by, a team of maybe 10, 15 sort of no-name developers, which, by the way, there are still games made that way. But, I mean, now you have games made by these scores of people. I mean, you have entire orchestras and visual artists and engineers. So the amount of time and effort that's gone into video games now versus what went into video games back then, here's what I'm getting at, is that the cost has stayed the same for the most part, now a $10 increase, right? The quality has gone through the roof, and we have more choice, more diversity, more everything in video games than you could ever imagine. But you would think, based on how kind of people react to these games and stuff like this, that the sky is falling. So has that translated into a gamer? So to put it in a question, are gamers entitled, or are they overly entitled? Is there any sort of, I don't want to say, is there a little bit crying over unspilled milk, so to speak?
I think we have become spoiled and we have become entitled to what we think reality should be, what our game experiences should be. So having thought about that, it's also related to recent discussions on cinema too, where Warner Media and HBO Max and AT&T are deciding that a lot of movies that were supposed to come out in theaters only are now coming out in theaters and on HBO Max, and that's upset a lot of directors, a lot of creative types, and also people who love cinema. But then there's also the other side who are like, I like being able to stream, and other people are arguing, well, you're entitled. You feel like you're entitled to have something on release day when you're not necessarily always going to. I'm not trying to go off on a tangent here, but I think this entitlement happens in all sorts of genres and ideas, and particularly with video games. I think we do feel entitled to have our experiences be a certain way. And I think I've had that experience before too, where I felt entitled to, quite honestly, right. And I think it'll go into the next topic. The only entitlement I have as an expectation of buying a game is that I should have a bug-free experience, that I should have no issues being able to complete the game without crashing. That's the only entitlement that a gamer should expect, is that you should have a complete product, not something that will be fixed months down the road.
Yeah, so I do think that it is interesting. I think that when you talk about what it is we're getting versus what it is we're paying for, I think we're in great shape. And I just think that there's less to complain about than I think that a lot of us are sort of thinking that there is, right? So we just don't have in addition to getting all the quality for the great price, we just don't also get to be part of the editorial process as well. You know what I mean? So you kind of have to go into it understanding that the developers they're going to make their game, and you can pay for it, you can not pay for it, but ultimately, like I said, Mike, I think we're in pretty good shape. Moving on to topic 3. Cyberpunk 2077. Speaking of getting what you pay for, right? Cyberpunk 2077, is this a good game? Is Cyberpunk 2077 a good game? 90 score on Metacritic from official critics, with a 6.7 score from user reviews. The PS4 and Xbox One reviews look pretty and fairly, and again, this is just looking at what we see on YouTube and other places, it looks fairly broken. Reviewers only received PC versions of the game, right? So if you were reviewing this game, you got the PC version. I know there were a couple instances of reviewers asking for console editions, but not really being able to get that. But the console version looking kind of in trouble here. Micah, have you seen what's going on with Cyberpunk 2077?
So I remember when this game got announced several years ago, and I remember the hype meter kind of going off the charts, and I put it in the back burner. I was like, yeah, this is going to be a great game when it comes out. I'm sure of it. I mean, they've made the Witcher series, which I'm not, I haven't played through, so I've always heard good things about CD Projekt Red since they first came on the scene years ago. But then the first delay occurred earlier this year, and I thought, okay, they need 6 more months to polish it up. That's fine. You want that. I mean, you don't want to put out a broken game. For the love of God, don't put out a broken game. Then the second delay happened. And then I heard that they're crunching. And I was like, oh, great, they're crunching. I mean, maybe they'll put out a game and they'll actually put out, a decent game. And then the moment I saw the reviews mentioning we can't even put in our own footage of the PC on these reviews, and it's a 90 Metacritic score, and I thought, this is BS. It's going to be a bad game. It's going to be a shit show. And sure enough, here's where we are. There's a reason the consoles were not allowed to be reviewed, because if they would have been reviewed, they would have gotten a 2 out of 10 easily, because that is currently what the user score is on Metacritic for Cyberpunk 2077 on PlayStation 4. 2.7 out of 10 is what users are actually reviewing. And this isn't to say that people aren't necessarily able to get around some of these fatal flaws in the game, but man, this game needed at least another year to 2 years for polish. It just was not ready for prime time. And I think the big issue is that I think they specifically targeted it for PC for a reason, because they wanted to go the next gen route. And I hear on PC it runs very flawlessly with bugs. There's still bugs on PC, but from a beauty perspective and also being able to load assets quickly, you don't have these visual flaws as much. But yeah, this game definitely needed more polish, and I'm certainly hoping they can turn this thing around. Because it's just not looking good from the perspective of me ever wanting to play this game.
Yeah, I think it highlights how difficult it is to make a really, really good, polished AAA game. I think it highlights how the level of difficulty that goes into it. Now, where I think CD Projekt Red got kind of caught with their pants down, so to speak, was I think they got caught between generations. So in other words, I think if they just would have made a PS4 version and an Xbox One version, the game was initially not supposed to be a next-gen game, right? It only became a next-gen game later on, and I'm sure that was part of the delays, right? The game was delayed 4 times, but I'm sure 2 of those delays might have just been next-gen delays where they're trying to accommodate for next-gen consoles. But I think that they just trying to do a little bit too much, too many different versions of the game. So in other words, they have the PC version, they got the PS4 version, they got the Xbox One version, right? They also now have PS5 versions and Series X versions. And presumably the game also has to work on Series S. And you also have to assume that the game needs to work on the original PS4, not just the PS4 Pro and, the original Xbox One. So you have all these different, you're talking about 6, 7 different versions of this game that need to roll out. And it's just very obviously spread a little thin, right? The PC version looks the best. And then the PS5 and the Series X version look a little bit better, or a little bit less better. And then it just sort of falls off a cliff from there, because it's just, I think that one of 2 things could have occurred, right? One of which would have been to just nix the PS4 and Xbox One version and just make it next gen.
Yeah.
Or, by the way, release the game 6 months ago and just not have a next gen edition, or have a next gen edition, a month from now after the game had been out for a year. You're sort of just releasing a patch, so to speak, to just sort of bring it up to next gen snuff, right? So I think that just too much going on. I think they got caught trying to do too much.
Yeah, I agree. I think the problem is when you have shareholders and you're beholden to them, you need to release a product in 2020 now to be able to meet our target deadlines. You can't release it in 2021. It is going to be released this year to make sure the margins for this year look good. I think that's part of the problem is from a business perspective. I'm more than sure that the developers knew. They knew this game was not ready to be released this year. But we're releasing anyway, and there's nothing we can do about it. So that's why we're going to crunch for 2 months straight. So I started looking back at other big games that came out in that critical time frame you were just talking about, which is between generations, right? And the AAA game that came out in 2013 was Grand Theft Auto 5. Came out for Xbox 360 first. And then I want to say, did it come out for PS3 a few months later, or when did it come out? It came out for the next consoles a year later. I know that. But when it first came out, it was only on Xbox. It was only on the Xbox 360 and PS3 at the time, I want to say. And from a performance perspective, you were mostly lucky if you got 30 frames per second while being able to walk around and drive around and things like that. But the moment big action started to happen, man, you had frame rate dips going down to the 20s easily, because the game on that hardware from 2006 could not keep up with the game's demands. So you definitely see that, where this game was meant to be run on a very powerful PC, a very powerful piece of hardware like the PS5 or Series X, but just could not keep up with that. And that's one of the reasons you see such bad performance on the PS4. But what GTA 5 did not have was game-breaking bugs, crashes, and things like that. That did not happen, as I recall, while playing those games. I mean, there was a few bugs, I think, like some crazy, shooting and then getting hit by a car and bounced throughout the entire atmosphere. I mean, that happened. That still happens in a lot of Rockstar games, but that's not your normal playing experience. I've seen this so many different times on, seeing different videos. And these kind of bugs, yeah, they're going to be patched. But man, I mean, it's just a bad first impression. And if I was ever to write a book on this kind of stuff, it would be The Audacity of Hype, right? Because this is just the exact thing that happens when you hype up a game tremendously. And I felt the hype in my heart, and everyone talking about it. Everyone's talking about it. I had people at work talking about it, and I just knew. It was like, I'm going to wait. I'm not going to get sucked into it, because I've been sucked. I got sucked into No Man's Sky. Right. And I didn't hate on it. I wasn't one of those people who, hated Sean Murray for promising the moon and not delivering, but I wasn't overly sold on the game after buying it. And that's probably the last time I bought a game release day, besides Red Dead Redemption 2, which I knew was going to be, very heavily polished game, and exactly what I wanted. But yeah, I mean, it's hard to deliver AAA games, but I think it's possible to do. We've seen plenty of developers do it, but you got to be able to, from a game director perspective and producer perspective, be able to push back on the business side of things and say, no, we are not publishing this piece of crap right now. It's not going to happen. But it's just hard for them to do. I mean, it's very difficult to be able to justify business decisions like that, because, I mean, you're easily replaceable in most situations like that.
There's an interesting interview a while back with former PlayStation president Sean Layden that was really interesting, that I highly recommend everyone go back and look it up. But he gives two interesting points that he sort of put forward in the article, which was that, number one, that type of AAA gaming is not sustainable. And then two, he questions whether games should even be that big, right? I think that there's an interesting, like, you can use two different words to describe one individual situation. I think that you can call Cyberpunk 2077, I think you can call it ambitious. But I think another way to phrase it would be to call it unfocused. I think that it's really big, it's really sprawling, it has all these things, but for why? That's the question I would say, is but for why? I think it would have been really cool if they just had a tighter, shorter, smaller experience. And again, that's not necessarily less ambitious. That's not saying, well, you're reducing your ambition. It's like, no, you can make an incredibly ambitious game in that way. But I think it just needs to be more focused. I think they just need to sort of scale it, not scale it out, but scale it in. Right. And I think that's what, when we talk about, we talked a lot about Naughty Dog today, but that's something that they do so well in terms of being able to package their games in such a way that they're able to generate that high level of quality, but without without the trouble of having to, create this overly burdensome system and or world that it exists in, if that makes sense.
No, that makes perfect sense. I mean, while playing through The Last of Us Part 2 the other day, I was exploring Seattle, and I was trying to find the bank to be able to go check that off the list. And I was trying to go through this, I thought I was going in the right direction. I was going through brush, but the game was like, no, you cannot go through here. Well, in a truly open world game, I can go anywhere I want, right? But no, Naughty Dog has a very specific path for things. You enter through the underground here to get to the bank. You don't enter through the brush at all. This brush, it's obviously, you can't clip through it. You can't get through it. Don't even try. It's meant that way because they want to linearly put you down a path. And what I've heard from reviews is that with Cyberpunk, people say if you just play the main story, it is actually pretty good. from the main story perspective, that is very well polished. But when you promise an open world game and it turns out to be more like a Naughty Dog type game with a very set action adventure type shooter element with a, like being able to go down a particular narrative path, that's where the hype dies, right? Because you promised open world, you promised all these side missions would be great. And I've got AI where characters in wheelchairs start running immediately once I start, bombing in certain areas. So you have these just ridiculous things happening. That I think, to your point, yes, they should have narrowed the scope and not promised open world. Instead, they should have just promised a great game. And I think what that sets up is Cyberpunk 2078, right? The next game. All right, we've already gave this AAA game. We got a lot of cash coming in. People love this franchise. Let's go for the next series where we get a little bit bigger in scope. We know we can deliver on this. Let's deliver on this.
I think that, not in the game itself, but in the spirit of what the game's trying to do, it reminds me a lot of old, or I would say early generation PS3 games. Just because every PS3 game in the early generation of PS3 had a multiplayer edition, or it had a multiplayer sort of setting, or, it had a multiplayer attached to it. No real reason for it. It just had the multiplayer attached to it, right? Just because they felt like every game needs to have a multiplayer. There's a lot of things looking through Cyberpunk 2077 that just feel kind of added on there, right? And because I'm not saying don't have an open world game. I think open world games are great and they should. They have a place, and by the way, a lot of them do it very, very well. Grand Theft Auto, right? Red Dead Redemption, Rockstar does these very, very well. But I think that when you talk about these open world games, I think you have to, and by the way, Rockstar actually did not do a good job of reining it in, but you have to rein it in a little bit. I think that when you talk about an open world game in this way, it's really difficult to do what Rockstar does in that way, to have this open world experience that is simultaneously a single player campaign, while simultaneously a multiplayer game, while simultaneously doing 11 different things. I just wish it was. One of the great things about the Doom franchise and the rebirth that came through Doom was how focused it was in terms of it's just single player shooter. It's a campaign, that's kind of just what it is, so I just would like to see it more focused.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that's the kind of thing where you can get stuck on creating your vision. Like, I have great visions of like what I think a great game would be. And then, being let me put it like this. I am also a side trade of a game developer enthusiast where I like to learn about how to create games and stuff like that. And I think of, simple things like, what if my dog Dave, create a game based off him, right? Just simple like stray dog, it's roaming streets, stuff like that. If you actually look at the scope of what just a simple game like that with a dog, even a side scroller, like there are a lot of elements that like even just one person can take them years to be able to do something simple like that. And 200 people, I don't know how many people CD Projekt Red has, but even so, getting so many people to work together to be able to create something of a vision and scope like this takes years in the making, which, by the way, they did have years in the making. They announced this in 2012, I want to say. So it's 8 years ago. I've heard some people say I've been waiting for this for 8 years. So, I mean, they did have years to be able to make this, but I mean, you definitely got to reduce your scope.
Let's bring in This is a great opportunity to bring in our topic question, right? So you can actually write in as well if you'd like to send in a question to the show. We'll read it on air. We'll answer your question. Please email us at show@playnationpodcast.com. The question that we have for this particular topic is this a good example of what AAA game development is supposed to look like? Is this what AAA game development is supposed to look like in 2020? I think that's a great question, right? So you're talking about how many years in development, how much crunch. They clearly. I mean, they made a profit on day one, so the game's profitable, but the game's buggy. It's a mess in terms of older consoles. It seemed to be sort of mismanaged in that way between generations. Is this AAA development? Is that what it's supposed to look like?
I mean, AAA development is not supposed to look like this. You're supposed to have great positive buzz. And really, for gamers who follow the game journalism too, I mean, I'm very disappointed in a lot of people giving a 90 Metacritic score, or even some people giving 100 out of 100 and saying game is broken and buggy, but 100 out of 100. And it's like, are you kidding me? Are you kidding me?
I think that, and again, you're 100% right, but I think that the part of that was the fact that they withheld the console versions, right? They
Yeah.
only sent the PC versions, which is kind of a kind of a sneaky thing to do, I think. But I think that the game was good at two things, right? And again, I want to get in. I want to give. We should have like an official Cyberpunk 2077 game review, and we both had an opportunity to sort of sit down and play it. But
Yep.
on its surface, looking at it sort of from 100 feet up or whatever, right? It looks like the game was good at two things: marketing and making money. Those were the two things that Cyberpunk did really, really well, because it doesn't seem like, and again, I'm probably being overly harsh here. The game does things well, right? But it just seems like that they missed the mark on so many to release a broken game like that. I just don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, you make a good point. I think that was the goal. It was definitely a business decision to try to get this game rushed out in the year 2020 to make sure that it did meet certain budget deadlines and, all that stuff. But Sony, Xbox, and Steam are all offering refunds on this game right now. So I think that's and that's not normal for them to offer refunds for games like this, but they are doing it for the goodwill of their players, because they know this is not looking good. It's just not, from the perspective of, Sony doesn't want to, any platform doesn't want to be beholden to one single publisher if they do, or one developer if they release a bad game. Offering refunds is exactly what you should be doing in this case, because you were promised something, you played it for a few hours, and you were like, nope, no way. I mean, no way I want $60 out of my bank account for this.
I wish that when developers are making these games, I wish they would look at, and I'm sure they do, but I wish they would consider strongly game completion percentages, right? The percentage of players that actually complete games, because it's low. Right. I mean, you're talking. I remember I was reading about how the Uncharted games and all this stuff, completion percentage somewhere in the range of like 40-50%, something like this. The percentage completion percentage rate for something like God of War, which is a very popular game, a very sort of, in comparison to this, a very short and compact game, right? Talking about maybe 50-60%. So if 50 to 60% are completing sort of shorter games, right? I just don't. And again, I understand the market for it, and I understand that people like it, and there are people out there who are going to disagree, but I just don't see the need for a 200+ hour game. I just don't, right? I think that you can create something that has something to say, that's very poignant, that gets it across. I mean, the equivalent would be like a 7-hour movie, right? That would be sort of the maybe an example in a different medium, right? Or a 15-minute song, although I'm sure there are great 15-minute songs. I'm sure there are great 7-hour movies, but it just doesn't need to be that long. And if it is that long, there probably should be a good reason.
Yeah, no, I mean, you raise a great point. And I think I heard even like, a few days ago, and I think you really need like a month to go through it to see these achievement percentages. But I did hear some stories of some people saying even one of the very first achievements you get just from the walkthrough, like the percentage rate is very, very low. And that is telling from the first week. But I think it remains to be seen. I think CD Projekt Red I'm rooting for them. I'm hoping they have a Hello Games story to come back. I'm hoping they take a little bit of this cash. And, to their credit, they did, and this is a crazy thing about the game business, is that you tied bonuses to Metacritic scores. And I just find that to be insane, simply because of the fact that just shows you exactly why game journalists rated it so highly, was to make sure that they reached game bonuses. But as a company, they said bonuses will not be tied to Metacritic scores. So as a business, they're probably listening to developers and be like, you were right. This game was not ready. It wasn't your fault. It wasn't the pandemic's fault. It's just the scope was too big, right? And we need more time. Let's get more time. Have your bonus. Have a good Christmas. Let's come back and make sure we do what we can to fix all these game-breaking bugs and improve performance and deliver the product we said we would. And hopefully a year or two from now, we will hear that PS4 performance was, somewhat better, at least 30 frames per second throughout most of the game, and that you and I will get a chance to play this when it becomes more native to the PS5.
Yeah, I mean, based on what I'm seeing, I just don't really see a reason to jump in and buy it on PS5 until they patch out a lot of these things, which is crazy to think about. But I just don't see the need to buy it until they fix a lot of these things. But and it's really tough on sort of the everyday CD Projekt Red employee because again, a lot of these decisions that we're questioning and talking about, and releasing and marketing and all that stuff, a lot of that's sort of management decisions. But the everyday person who's developing this game has been developing it for how many years, right? And presumably crunching like crazy and going through this awful schedule to get it out and get it out the door after 4 delays, so they certainly deserve their bonus. But man, what a path to get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Micah, I would say this, right? So this has been a great episode 4, right? So as we're closing out, right? I mean, what are you playing this week? Any additional plans for the week?
So, I mean, probably going to try to finish up The Last of Us Part 2.
Nice.
So I read a good story or a good article about these open world games, and when you get open world game fatigue or even just game fatigue, right? Mm-hmm. What you should do is, if your intent and goal is to finish a game, but you're feeling burnt out, in order to avoid burnout, don't put it down for weeks at a time, because when you come back, you're not going to remember anything. You're going to not even remember the control scheme. Like, even switching between The Last of Us and Red Dead, it's different, certain controls, right? So what they recommend actually is take a break for 3 days. 3 days is apparently enough time to give your brain some time to be like, all right, I'm done with this. I'm taking a break. And then you come back to it, and then you try to complete it. So hopefully, this will be the kind of thing. And I know probably think people are thinking, like, how crazy are you to not be able to just finish that game in one setting? But, you just have a life, it's just, you're not always playing games. And when you are, you only have a set amount of time, so that's my life. Hopefully being able to finish that, playing through Sackboy, going to try to find that Britney Spears Toxic level that you were talking about last week. So looking forward to that. But I was having some fun with my son last night playing that. We were having a good time doing trophy photos at the end. Him picking me up or me picking him up, and kind of just having fun. There's some really good co-op levels in there. Definitely enjoying the aspects of that game.
It's important to have a life. I think that's sage advice, Mike. I think it's very important to have a life. And as well, look, I just to give the listeners an update, I feel like I'm getting my life back just because we were talking last how I was doing that rip snorter trial in Sackboy. I am happy to report to everyone here, look, it's done. We got it done. We got the gold medal.
Excellent.
And so I know. And so now I'm moving on to other things. Because the rip snorter trial, I'm going to be honest, it kind of stressed me out a little bit. So now I kind of need to take a step back a little bit. So I've been playing some bug snacks, right, to sort of unwind a little bit, the nice little relaxation game, catching some bugs, right, and then feeding them to other animals, and then watching those animals turn into fruit. So that is sort of the bug snacks in a whole.
The circle of life.
Playing bug snacks, doing that, and beyond that, I think it's just going to be one more work week until we reach the pinnacle that is going to be the holidays, and some well-needed R&R, I think, all around, in terms of a little bit of rest, a little bit of relaxation, and just taking it easy.
Yep, I agree with that. Looking forward to it.
Micah, this has been episode 4. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening. Look forward to speaking with you next time.